Did you know that War Child was originally meant to be a double album and accompany a movie about the afterlife, which never came to fruition? That's one of the things I'm going to talk about in this deep dive. Today I'm talking about War Child, the seventh studio album by Jethro Tull, released on October 14th, 1974. This album is celebrating 50 years. It's very significant because they decided to go back to their classic sound, as the previous album was a very ambitious album, which was called A Passion Play. That was a progressive rock album, but this album is more classic Jethro Tull sounding. The album was recorded between December 1973 and February 1974 at Morgan Studios in London, and some of the songs actually date back to early sessions going back to 1972. This was originally conceived as a double LP, as it was meant to accompany a movie that never came to fruition. I'll talk about that later. Eventually, they just released a single album with 10 tracks. The album was produced by Terry Ellis, but most of the production was overseen by Ian Anderson. The band didn't really abandon their progressive rock sound, but the album has a different type of feel. It was lighter, it was more whimsical. They used different instrumentation, which included strings that were arranged by David Palmer, who is now Dee Palmer. And those strings actually caused the album to get mixed reviews because they were very prominent in the mix. As for the lyrics, they spoke about various themes. Some of the songs were critiques of society and religion. And two of those songs were Bungle in the Jungle and Queen and Country, which I will do a deep dive later on. The album did pretty well. It reached number 2 on the Billboard charts, which meant it was a commercial success. Even though it received mixed reviews, the critics said it was not one of their best albums, but it was an important evolution in their sound. This album actually paved the way for the next album, which is Minstrel in the Gallery from 1975. Let's talk more about the concept and how the movie never came to fruition. So basically, as I mentioned before, A Passion Play was a divisive album, which was a follow-up to Thick as a Brick, which is a much better album, in my opinion at least. They wanted to go back to something a little more simple, as the two aforementioned albums were a lot more complex. This was initially meant to be a soundtrack for a movie. The idea behind the movie was about these afterlife experiences of a young girl who dies in an auto accident. In the movie, she's supposed to meet God, Lucifer, and St. Peter. It was meant to explore different religious and existential questions. For example, one of the questions was going to be what happens after death. And another subtopic or sub-theme is how society is affected by the consequences of war. And they also talk about another subtopic, which is the human experience in terms of loss and longing. Ian Anderson had some big plans for the film. For example, he wanted to get somebody who was a famous actor, a very famous actor on the BBC and in England, and somebody you probably wouldn't expect, but I'm talking about John Cleese of Monty Python. He wanted to get him involved, but there are too many logistical problems, so he eventually gave up on this movie. But the original idea for War Child was to make a double album. They decided not to go the double album route, and they wanted to keep things simple. For example, the album has shorter song structures, which in turn made the album more accessible. There's this lighter musical tone as opposed to the darker themes on A Passion Play. Even though they address serious topics such as society and religion, kind of had this quirkier tone, and the songs were structured in a way to be more like pop songs in order to appeal to a wider audience while maintaining their sound. Now you may be wondering, what is the meaning behind the title of War Child? Basically, it's the idea that everyone living in modern society are war children, whether it be through the literal warfare or capitalist competition. One of the songs on the album is called Queen and Country. I'll talk about that soon. And another theme that is explored is the aggressive nature in humans and how it can be a driving force for success, but at the same time, be very destructive. I want to talk about some of the meanings behind some of the most significant songs on the album. Then I'll talk about the albums and music from my own point of view. First song I want to talk about is probably the most well-known song from the album, that is Bungle in the Jungle. Basically meant as a metaphor for human behavior and society. They use the metaphor of the animal kingdom to describe this type of situation. So in the song, the jungle symbolizes basically modern society, specifically cities or other urban settings, and they're compared to being animals in the wild. Some of the lyrics reflect this, such as they say palm tree apartments or monkeys who live in dark tents. They're comparing the jungle to city life, and they're also comparing how humans are competitive and aggressive. For example, there's a line, I'm a tiger when I want love, but I'm a snake if we disagree. And that's something that shows how humans can be animal-like as well. This can also be seen as a commentary on the music industry in the 70s, as it was portrayed as a cutthroat environment, saying that the music business is a jungle where there are opportunities, but at the same time, you must survive. There was another popular song called Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day. This one was basically a reflection on life and used a metaphor for skating on thin ice as a metaphor on how life can be very fragile. This is also a song about climate change, something they would do a few years later on the album Stormwatch, which is an album that was more dedicated on that particular topic. And I'm actually going to link that video on the end screen so you can check that out. And I want to talk about another song called Queen and Country. This is a song that explores themes of nationalism, war, the military. Basically, the song is a critique on the military, how people fight for a country blindly. It also addresses the physical and emotional toll of war. It discusses the sacrifices that people make in serving their country and reflects on the true cost of patriotism. But basically, it's a social commentary. The opening track is called War Child. This one kind of reminds me of the opening to Pink Floyd's The Wall. I just happen to have this DVD lying around, so that's why I grabbed it. It's a live version. But anyway, it reminds me of that because you hear people talking and there's two people, they're drinking tea. They're asking the other, do you want some more tea? And you hear these like planes flying overhead. That's what reminded me of this, The Wall. And it goes into the main song, which you hear some piano playing. There are lots of different instruments in the song. I think the piano plays a major role, and as well as the bass guitar. And I think I hear some saxophone in the background and some different instrumentation. And they add these effects like warplanes, and that kind of adds to the whole theme of the song. So it's a pretty cool way to open the album. It kind of just sets the stage. You know, this is like what you're getting. Then there's a song, Queen and Country. This has some different instruments. I've never really heard with Jethro Tull using them. They're playing an accordion that kind of makes it sound like polka music or something like that. There's a lot of orchestration that kind of gives it this theatrical sound as well. And Martin Barre plays this guitar solo, which to my ears kind of echoes the style of Brian May of Queen. That I thought that was pretty cool. Next song is called Ladies, and this is Jethro Tull doing one of their acoustic folk songs. It sounds like classic Jethro Tull. You have acoustic guitars, you have flutes, you have the softer singing by Ian Anderson. They also continue with the orchestral sound that is present on the other songs. The song takes a complete turn during the last 30 seconds or so, and this is where they start to sound like this 50s rock and roll song, but it's only like 30 seconds. I don't know why they did it that way, but then it fades off. Then the next song is called Backdoor Angels. This is a pretty cool, underrated track. People don't really talk about it too much, but I think it's one of those that kind of stands out. And I'll tell you why in a minute. It's a laid-back track. It has some softer flute playing. There's different sounds, and they add different parts of the song, like keyboards and saxophone as well. So there's lots of different instruments. So I think this one has more of that progressive rock sound. You hear a lot of keyboard playing. And this is the first song where Martin Barre actually starts to play some of his heavier riffs. Because on the first two songs, I'm thinking Martin Barre is kind of missing on this album, but he gets a little heavy here. And I'm thinking, it reminded me of some early Genesis. I think it was the keyboard tone that made me think of that. And this one has a progressive rock sound, and it reminds me of the style they would be doing on the next album, which is Minstrel in the Gallery, and that will come out a year later. So this track kind of like foreshadows like that sound on that particular album. When you listen to the song, I think the last minute or two sounds like this free-form instrumental jam session. I found that very interesting. And then the last part of the song goes back to that folk rock sound that they are known for. After this is a song called Sea Lion. This is a very classic Jethro Tull sounding type of song. It has elements of progressive rock. There's a little bit of hard rock, a little bit of folk rock. And there's some soft-spoken parts that are done by Jeffrey Hammond. There's also a track called Sea Lion 2 on the different like editions. It's like a bonus track, but I didn't include any of those. Jeffrey Hammond speaks these different lines during the verses. The song is a few times where they shift gears, and some parts are the orchestral parts, and some parts sound more like a typical Jethro Tull. Then the next two songs are two of the more popular songs. It's the side two of the album, so if you have the vinyl, it would be the album where you would flip it over and listen to the next side. So the next song is called Skating Away in the Thin Ice of a New Day. It's a popular song. It's appeared on various greatest hits albums and compilations over the years. It starts off with the same type of skit that started off the first side of the first song, and at side two, it's people drinking tea. It's one of those songs. At first, you just hear Ian Anderson and an acoustic guitar. He's just singing, which is something Jethro Tull included on most of their albums. I'm talking about this type of like folk song where it's just him and a guitar. Later on, the other members do slowly start to come into the song. So, for example, Barry Barlow plays some bongo drums, and then you can hear some bass guitar. Then there's a little bit of electric guitar by Martin Barre. Then after this is probably the most popular song from this album, and that is Bungle in the Jungle. And probably also one of my favorite Jethro Tull songs, because the lyrics are very clever, as I was talking about before. It has a great melody. It's a very memorable song. It's one of those songs just very representative of their sound. It has a little bit of everything, such as the bass guitar, the electric guitar, and some orchestral sections. The next song is called Only Solitaire. It's another laid-back folk rock song. It features Ian Anderson and his acoustic guitar. It's a short song. It's only 1 minute and 40 seconds long. The penultimate song is called The Third Hurrah. This is another song that has that classic Jethro Tull sound. It almost sounds like something you would hear at a Renaissance fair. It has that medieval type of folk music with lots of different instruments used. And the song keeps with the main theme of the album where they mention War Child in the lyrics. This also has a progressive rock type of sound with lots of keyboards, as well as the bass guitar, which can be heard up front. One of the lyrics is War Child dancing that away. Kind of song you can imagine this king's castle and people are dancing in a ballroom. When you listen to the song, it just brings up that type of imagery. So that's what it sounded like to me. The last song on the album is called Two Fingers. This sounds like one of those upbeat acoustic rock songs where they start with a guitar and they slowly bring in the other instruments. They also include different instruments. For example, I heard some more saxophone on the song as well. The song has the bass guitar mixed like all the way up high there, and the electric guitar is mixed lower. And you don't hear it as much, but they mix in lots of keyboard sounds as well. It's a song, you think it's going to be a ballad, but it turns into one of the harder rocking songs. So that's it. Check out my recent review of Stormwatch. I'm going to stick that one right here. And that one recently celebrated an anniversary as well. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Please give this video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe. If you have not already, I do rock and metal reviews, I do rankings, and I do classic album reviews. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.